All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Tuner Talk. I'm so glad to have Graham finally back. There's been tons of things that have been happening in the community, and I know you guys have tons of questions. We've got a couple of questions I've written down. Graham brought some as well, and we're going to get right into it. Graham, thanks so much for coming back.
You bet.
And we're just going to jump right in because I know everybody knows who you are. Everybody has been waiting for another Tuner Talk. So, big thing that's been going on. We have tons more parts. I did a couple of videos in the last month actually about more parts. We've got more jpipes, more intercoolers. People want to know about intakes. We've got tons of intakes on the market. We've got Perrin, we've got the ETS, Mishimoto, AEM. You actually did a video with SubiSpeed recently, which was really good. I loved
Yeah.
it. It was so much information. Can you just tell everybody what your opinions were on these intakes? People want to know, I don't want to get tuned just yet, or I want to stick on the OTS. What's
Mhm.
safe, in your opinion, and what isn't?
Sure. So yeah, in that video we tested Perrin, AEM, and ETS. Those were the three intakes that we had at the time um, that SubiSpeed brought over and wanted to do the testing on. Specifically, Perrin asked, can you test this with a stock tune and just kind of validate our findings that this is safe for a stock tune because that's how they designed it. So the first thing we did was put the car back on the stock tune, stage 0 with Cobb so I could still log it. Installed the Perrin intake and did some runs on the dyno. And as I said in the video, I did find that in some spots it was a little bit leaner than stock, but for the most part, I consider it to be pretty darn safe. I wouldn't recommend going out and, beating on it really hard and, running, doing 0 to 140 runs necessarily, because there's still a lot of benefits if we tune the car and really control the fueling better and get it exactly where we want. But for a daily driver, for a little squirt here and there, I genuinely feel like it's perfectly fine. So we figured that out, and then we put the AEM on there next, and it's close. It's definitely not as large and not as far off on the fueling as ETS is without the sleeve, or even with the sleeve. When you put the sleeve in the ETS, it gets a little bit better, but I still find that to be a little bit too lean, again, on a stock map where the fuel control is just open at a certain point. But yeah, we did all that testing, and we did find that Perrin works okay stock. AEM also not bad, but not as ideal as I would like to see. And then again, ETS is a no-go, but I think everybody already understands that by
Yeah,
now.
even with the sleeve.
Even with the sleeve, I still don't feel like it runs at a safe enough AFR to really feel confident in saying, yeah, you can push it a little bit, you can enjoy it a little bit. If you're not driving the car very hard, any intake's fine. But if you do like to use some boost and run through the gears, it's very important that the fueling is correct. So that's the big thing.
That's good. So now, what's interesting here is I believe that the AEM is a full pipe that goes to the inlet, right? Compared to the Perrin,
That,
where it
that
actually doesn't go all the way.
That's correct. Yeah, and that was the thing that I didn't even realize, is that Perrin's kind of designed theirs in a way where it connects to that stock accordion piece, like we talked about, and whereas AEM runs straight over to the turbo, and so does ETS. I guess I meant to ask Jeff about that when we talked, but I never did ask him why exactly he designed it that way. But I know that it does work in conjunction with an inlet too. So you could do the two things together and end up all the way going over to the turbo. But I wasn't really clear on why it was designed like that. But I do think in our testing we saw that the AEM and the ETS outperformed the Perrin, and I think that was part of the reason why.
Yeah, because of that. And you did mention in the other video, you did mention that for future. So if you're looking for something that you're going to build future, like your future build, you'll probably go with the ETS because if you know if you're going to tune, you're going to tune it. So you just get the one
Oh
that
yeah,
is going to be tunable.
yeah. So one of the big things is that we're on the Perrin intake and even on the AEM, we're pretty close to the airflow reading limits right now. And so, you know, it, there's some people that are testing some turbo upgrades, and we might get to the limit of that, what the intake can read, even with just a small bolt-on turbo upgrade. Certainly, if if you're looking at that new ETS turbo kit, it comes with a large intake, of course, but even some of the bolt-in stock location turbo upgrades that I think we're going to see, the Perrin intake and the AEM as they exist might be limited, where the ETS won't.
Okay,
So that
so
is something to consider.
that's good because I mean, there's still a lot of people that are hesitant on getting the tune, or even just they see other people getting modified, but they're not 100% sold. They don't want to mess up their warranty. So
Yeah.
basically, if you're just chilling around with the car, not doing anything crazy, the Perrin intake is the way to go. You can use it with both? Now, this was for stock and the OTS map?
Yes, either one. It works. Yeah, it works fine stock. Stock is the really big thing because that's the situation where you don't want to do anything. When you put the OTS map on there, even the Cobb OTS map changes the fuel control to be full-time closed loop fueling and changes the fueling targets.
Got it.
And so it's going to work even better in theory with the, with the Perrin intake. But it's designed for stock intake. So again, the Perrin is the right choice to go with OTS in my opinion.
Good, good. I'm glad we got that out of the way because I probably at least once a day somebody asks like, "Hey, I just got this car. I really want those whoosh whoosh noises. Which one do I go?" And I'm pretty sure the community has gotten on board by telling people don't get the ETS one or don't get anything else unless you are going to get tuned. I'm glad that that information is circling around. So that's intakes. Next, we're going to talk about air oil separators and catch cans. I know there's a couple more on the market. I know you had mentioned the IAG one is out. I know Perrin one. I don't know if Perrin's AOS is out to purchase, but it is coming. And I know there's going to be tons more. So do you mind giving us a little insight on why would you get one and what are the big benefits of an AOS?
Sure. Yeah. So this is universal to a lot of engines. Some engines out there, I can think of some German engines that do a really good job with their crankcase ventilation and their engine block ventilation. Basically, long story short, there's always going to be like combustion gases, things getting past the rings. There's vapors inside of an engine block and inside of a head that need to be vented somewhere. You can't just completely seal it up. That air and that pressure has to go somewhere. And since there's oil in those places, all that pressure and all that heat gets a lot of oil mixed in with the vapor. And so you can't just let that off into the atmosphere. That would be bad for the planet. So it has to go back in and be burned off, basically. That's the best way to deal with it is to burn it off. And to burn it off means to...
Oh, we lost your camera.
Hang on. Sometimes it does this. Let's see. What's going on? Come back.
Oh, while he's doing that, I want to mention AOS is air oil separator. So the difference between the catch can and the AOS is the air oil separator is supposed to literally do what it says in the name, separate the air from the oil, whereas the catch can will actually catch all of the oil in literally a can, which then you can go and clear out. I'd say probably monthly, or I don't know what frequency you would do, but something that you can check on your own. I know a couple of people do like the idea of having a catch can so they can physically see, A, that it's working, and B, how much oil is coming into it. So there's different applications would really call for different things. I don't know price-wise. They're starting to get pretty similar. Maybe like $100 from each other. I know on the FA20, I think the cheapest catch can that I saw was maybe like $180, $200, whereas like an air oil separator was maybe like $400 or $500. So something to think about. Graham I'll actually ask him again, what are some of our best applications for those things? Because, if you are building a race car, chances are you're probably going to want an air oil separator, possibly. I don't even know exactly what that answer is. My 2021 WRX actually never had an air oil separator or a catch can, which was a terrible choice on my part, but I didn't know enough about the car and the parts at the time to be able to make that decision. I actually remember I actually talked to a different company before I talked to Ecotech here in St. Louis, who did recommend the first thing I do is buy an air oil separator. And they quoted me a crazy price to even install it. I'm not going to say who it was, but it was like $1,200. And I was like, I think I'll wait before I do anything like that.
All right. Sorry. So yeah. Gases in the crankcase and the heads have to go somewhere. Can't go in the atmosphere, needs to be burned off. So it makes its way into the inlet. It gets basically sucked in. And like turbocharged vehicles especially create a lot more gases, a lot more, air oil vapors in the crankcase and in the heads that have to go somewhere. And so a lot of, manufacturers, just for cheap reasons, they just end up putting it right back into the inlet. It gets sucked in, it gets burned through the engine, and it, gets your valves dirty. Also, if it's sucking a lot of oil vapor can cause detonation. It lowers your octane effectiveness. So that can be a problem. what else? I don't know. Those are kind of the main things. So you don't want, you want to try to separate the oil. The whole idea is separate the oil from the air, get the oil into a can, even just a catch can, which means you're just catching it and then you empty it every so often. Or the term air oil separator means you're separating it, but then you're letting the oil return back into the engine. So that's the way that the IAG, for example, AOS works, is it lets those vapors go in there and kind of swirl around, and it forces the oil to separate from the air, stick to the walls of the can, which are also heated by coolant to make sure that in cold weather this works even better. The oil works its way down to the bottom of the can, goes back into the engine. The clean air vapor goes through and gets burned off, basically. So that's the whole idea. And yes, the harder you're using the car, the more racing you're doing, it's worthwhile to do an air oil separator of some kind. Now, there's a kind of a long-standing argument between catch cans and AOS. Some people will say, well, whatever I'm catching in there, I don't want that going back in my engine. Because if you look at it in the winter, especially if you're using ethanol fuels, it's some pretty nasty looking stuff. My opinion is, as long as you're warming up the engine all the way, you're not doing really short drives where you're putting a lot of that crap in your oil before it gets a chance to get hot, that could be a problem. If you do really short trips on the winter in ethanol, a catch can could be better in that scenario. But as long as you're warming the car up, you're driving it, you're getting some load and some boost into it, and you're getting your oil up to full temp, that's going to burn that stuff off. So it shouldn't be an issue, generally speaking, to separate it. So I'm a proponent of air oil separators. I like not having to deal with a catch can. I think it's just nice to have a maintenance-free solution you don't have to think about. And I've done catch cans. I've done 1 catch can, 2 catch cans. I've done 3 catch can stuff. And then I went to air oil separators. I used the Grimspeed thing on top of your oil cap for a while. I've done it all. And to me, the AOS style has always been the best. And I can't pick a favorite. I think IAG has a really nice design. I've also seen some nice things out of Killer B. Perrin's. I've run Perrin's catch cans in the past. I don't think we don't need to get into like which one's the best, but I think the bottom line is it's a good idea on these cars. We're already seeing some benefit from it, and we're already seeing some situations that seem to be coming up where there is potentially an issue going on, where there is quite a bit of oil burning in the cylinders and maybe causing some of the early engine failures that we have seen. So hard to say, but there's maybe some theory there that the way the PCV is designed and pulling in some oil vapor into the engine in these cars might be actually different and potentially damaging compared to an FA20. We don't know yet for sure, but I've been having some conversations with people that kind of revolve around that. So AOS, good idea. That's my opinion right now for sure, if anybody asks me.
All right, so I'll be brave. I'm going to go install that AOS real quick.
Yes, get that on there, yes.
It's been on my to-do list for so long, but every time I open that box and I see those hoses, I'm just like, oh, okay.
I know.
I want to do it myself.
And I'll tell you what, you can do AOSs 2 ways. You can just ram jam it in there and it looks like heck, or you can take your time and spend the extra hour and a half and route all the hoses and cut them the right lengths, and it'll look so much nicer.
And that's what I'm gonna do. That's why I haven't done it.
Yeah, wait till you have some time. Put the kid to bed. Say goodnight to the wife, and then go out to the garage for 4 hours and get it done.
That is actually next on my step. Now, the IAG one, where does it physically sit in the engine bay? Because I've seen a couple of different configurations now.
I think I believe. Let me look. I just saw one. I should know where it's at, but I'm so tired from this last week.
Is it on the back left? Like the
side? It's like back where the turbo would be on an EJ engine.
Okay.
So that's a great spot there because there's kind of like a void there. But yeah, just to the left of the intercoolers where it sits.
Yeah. And that's great because if you're going with a front mount, there's tons of space there once you take that top mount out.
Yeah, but it looks, I looked at it on one of the cars that I was tuning last week, and I really like the way it looks. It's super tidy. The lines look really nice. I got nice little bracket that helped kind of route this line over the top of the intake and down to where it goes.
Yeah, we've got a couple of people in our YouTube community. Actually, Joey actually has an IAG on his car. He did a whole installation video of that, I think like a couple of weeks ago, and it looked pretty good. Obviously, that one doesn't help me, so it gives me an idea of what to do. So speaking of intercoolers, let's get to our next thing. So we wanted to talk about this whole intercooler situation, front mount versus top mount, and the effects of the intercooler on the car. There's some things that you wanted to talk about, how you saw on the dyno. So
Yeah. So one of the most common questions that we get as a tuner, and this isn't just for the FA24, this is just tuning in general. When it comes to upgrading your intercooler, people always ask me, well, how much more power will I make? And especially when we're talking about upgraded top mounts, a lot of times, the answer surprises people to say, well, it really won't make a difference for one pull on the dyno. A lot of times, the intercoolers on these cars, and the FA24 is no exception. It's a pretty good intercooler. It's a good tube and fin design. And when we look at intercoolers, if we want to dive in deeper, there's typically bar and plate, and then there's tube and fin. Tube and fin tends to actually do a really good job of shedding off heat, whereas bar and plate will kind of give you potentially, I think that the manufacturing of bar and plate is much more affordable to do. And you can put some good fin density in there, and you can do a thicker, larger core, and you can get some good cooling done. But honestly, like tube and fin is a pretty good design, and that's how the OEM works. And so it's quite good. But that aside, the stock intercooler is good enough that on the dyno in a nice controlled environment for one full pull, you're not going to heat soak it enough to affect the power. So even if you do swap on an intercooler that is significantly better at shedding the heat, and you make the same pull with the same boost, you're going to see the same horsepower potentially. You're not going to see the effect on the dyno during one pull. But the way I always explain to people is, if I do 3, maybe 4 back-to-back pulls on the stock intercooler, by the 4th one, my power might be down 15, 20, maybe even 30 horsepower up top, because my charge air temps are much higher. But if I put a really good intercooler on there, upgraded top mount, let's say, or especially a front mount, I can do those same 4 pulls. And with a front mount car, they might all make exactly the same horsepower. And from some of the tests I've done when I'm stress testing this engine, I do get exactly the same horsepower in 4 pulls in a row with almost no cool down, just because it can maintain the same temperature in the dyno room with good air supply. Top mount intercooler, there's tends to always be some bit of heat soak. Even a really good top mount intercooler is still going to heat soak a little bit by that 3rd or 4th run, but it's much less than stock if it's a good design. And so therefore the power is maintained. So I tell people, on the dyno, you're not going to see the difference, but if you're out driving it and you're doing some spirited driving, it's going to maintain your peak power for longer, because simply the temperature of the air going in the engine is going to stay lower for longer.
Yeah, because if you ever do take off the intercooler, you notice it sits like right on top of the engine, right? So there is a lot of heat coming up from it. It works, like you said, it works just fine-ish. But once you replace it, especially now we have that front mount going, I like to keep an eye on just like the temperatures, just to see how much different it is. Because when I'm out there, I haven't done a whole lot of racing in the last couple of weeks, but like the few times I've done it, I can see the difference, because that's something that Adam and I were looking at when we were on the dyno. As soon as we installed that front mount, the temperatures were so much lower consistently. Every single pull, that was one thing you didn't have to worry about. So that's still something I like to look at, and it is pretty cool. So now, okay, so let's say you got the same person who's not really ready to make big power, right? Would you still recommend going with the front mount for this person? He still wants to get an intercooler. He has an intake. He has got a jpipe. He's making reasonable power, but wants to, nothing crazy. Maybe even just on 93. Which of those two would you recommend? Front mount or top mount?
Well, so I generally try to, if I talk to somebody about it, I say, well, look, what's the use of the car going to be? Are you mostly just driving it to work? Or do you like to autocross? Do you want to go do some track racing? Do you like to go out with your buddies at night and, do yanks on the highway? What's your use case? And if it's anything more than, some daily driving or some more occasional spirited use, the front mount can make sense. You will get more performance, and it'll hold up a lot better under harsher use, because again, the core is, like you said, it's away from above the engine, it's out in the front. It's got much more surface area. It can shed the heat so much better. So it works well for performance. And the interesting thing with both of the FA engines, FA20 and FA24, is that because the turbo's down low, you're trading one length of pipe for the other. So in other words, what I mean is you're going to be shortening the run between the turbo and the intercooler when you move to a front mount, and you're just going to be going longer from the intercooler up to the throttle body. So you don't really like, if you put a front mount on an EJ engine, you are adding a lot of extra pipe because the turbo is up near the intercooler on an EJ engine. It's a very short run into the back of a top mount and then a short run into the throttle body. So you add a front mount, and now you got to run all the way down to the intercooler and then all the way back up around to the throttle body. But because the turbo's down low on the FAs, normally they make a long run up to the intercooler and then into the engine, and you're just switching it. You're doing a short run into the front mount and a long run up to there. So you don't change your piping. Now, what you do change is when you've got that much more volume of core, it takes a bit more to fill it up, which means it's a little bit laggier. That turbo lag feeling is going to be higher with a front mount. And it's, the RPM at which you'll see peak boost is going to be a bit lower, or excuse me, a bit higher.
Yeah.
So if somebody's like, I want the best throttle response, I want my spool to feel like stock exactly. I don't want to feel any more turbo lag. The top mount can make sense. A really good top mount can feel a bit better in that sense. But again, the trade-off might be that, when you're autocrossing, by the end of your run, it's pretty hot and you're you're not getting your best times. Or if you're especially on the road course, it could be very beneficial to have a front mount. And so again, in racing applications, you almost never see any kind of significantly, competitive track Subaru using a top mount anymore. It just, there's no reason. And that's, it's the trade-off is worth it to put the intercooler down in a spot where it's got good airflow and it's a lot larger. So I don't know. That's how I talk to people about it and kind of help them make the decision.
Now I'm going to hit you with something because you just said most competitive sports, but did you watch the Nürburgring 24-hour or see anything? And guess what they were running?
Oh yeah,
a top mount with an upgraded turbo.
I know,
but we actually had this conversation with tons of people on Reddit about why the hell are they running a top, but they were also only making like 380 horsepower, which is pretty good, like 430-ish torque.
And they're doing it on purpose. They're trying to test the car in a packaging configuration that represents closer to what the consumer buys.
Right.
They certainly know that they're giving a compromise there, and they probably have extra things too, like water spray. They probably have cold water spray that comes onto it. They certainly have some really good ducting in and out. They're probably using an even higher quality core than OEM. So it, sure, from a quick glance, you're like, yeah, they're on a top mount, but it's not your average Joe's top mount either, and it's not the same situation completely. But you're not wrong. In that situation, they are using a top mount and they're getting away with it. And you'll see that in rally sometimes too. They'll run top mounts in rally again because they're lower horsepower, but they're using other things there to kind of deal with it.
Yeah. So for those of you, I know some of you have talked to me about the Japanese only videos that have been popping up on YouTube. I've been trying to get Google to translate most of them. It's actually been really hard, but they actually had two post-race videos where they talked about everything about the car, which I'm actually working on translating. So that video will be out very soon. Because when they posted that car, I wanted to know everything about it because there was so many cool things that they were kind of changing, but it was like very similar to what we got, minus obviously the upgraded turbo, which now we are getting upgraded turbo. So, and I'm glad that all these things that I'm saying just kind of like keep leading into like the next question. So we're going to stop and talk real quick because people still ask me about my last dyno day. What happened with my car? Because I did make that post on Facebook, and a lot of you guys watching, you read that post, and you're asking me, and I was like, well, I'm just going to step back. And I was actually waiting for this tuner talk to address this because I wanted to hear it, and I want everybody else to hear it straight from you. So what happened?
Okay, so this is perfect timing because I know I told you that we had a theory that some of those new injection-related tables that we got from Cobb had some bugs or some unknown behaviors or some things that surprised us. Remember how we talked about that?
Yep.
Well, Cobb did some investigating and did just literally, I believe it was yesterday, or the day before, in a Protuner group that we're all in. They did let us know that indeed there is a bug. The stuff that we saw is indeed a problem, and that they're still investigating how to get around it. And basically, what that is these engines are direct injection, so the timing of when you start spraying the fuel is critical. And it can be beneficial to start spraying the fuel a little earlier, a little bit closer to when the exhaust stroke is finished, so that you can finish spraying before the start of the spark. So they call that start of injection is when you start injecting, and the end of injection is when you finished. And we do some math to figure out how, where we are in the cycle of the engine. You can't just spray any time. You have to wait and spray within an acceptable window, and you have to finish before you go to light the spark. If you don't, very bad things happen if you're trying to still spray fuel. Now, a lot of intelligent ECUs, Subaru not being one of them, but a lot of intelligent ECUs, at least on the FA20, I don't know what, we don't have all the information on the FA24. Maybe they do have some clipping and some cutoff. Maybe that's what we're running into. We don't know for sure yet that I've seen, but like on a Volkswagen, on an Audi, on a Porsche, even on Focus, Ford, a lot of other direct injection ECUs, where you're in there tuning, they have an end of injection clip, meaning they will not let the fuel keep spraying and hit the spark. You can't, so they kind of save you from yourself. Subaru's never done that. So that's where a lot of tuners got in trouble on the FA20 engine and would bend rods because they weren't respecting those limits. And I'm even seeing it happen now on FA24. Some tuners don't really understand what they're doing with those windows and those limits. So, but basically, Cobb exposed some tables for us that allowed us to start moving that injection window a little bit sooner. And that's helpful with ethanol because we need to spray the fuel for so much longer. So we were able to start moving that window. And that is something that we utilize on the FA20s to great effect. It works very well. So that's something that I started doing some careful testing with, my own cars, with people that know that they're, doing some testing with some things that are unknown. And immediately with one guy, I was like, okay, something's not right. This is not happy. We worked really slow. Then we hit a point where it's like, suddenly the car's pissed. And we were doing full E85 on his car. We weren't doing a ton of boost, and he was pretty light mods. And, we saw some funky things, and we thought, well, maybe it's a low side pump. So we stopped, we rolled everything back, went back to normal. And, he said, okay, I'll pick up a low side pump and we'll try that. Well, then shortly thereafter, we got together to do the testing on the dyno. And I think we theorized your fuel was probably pretty close to E50, perhaps maybe a little bit higher. And here's what happened with your car. It's interesting. It was actually a combination of this bug, but also it's a combination of what we can also talk about tonight, which is limitations of how, the fuel system and higher ethanol and higher boost. So we were kind of shooting for some bigger power on your car. And so I started bringing in the boost pretty early, and I actually hadn't touched those injection tables yet. I left them alone because I wanted to work on it first without. So, but I did bring in quite a bit of boost, and we did genuinely see the fuel pressure not keep up. So that was one thing that we ran into. And so at the time, I didn't know about, I wasn't sure about this bug with the injection angle yet. And so when I sent you the second map that night or that day, I lowered the boost quite a bit in the early RPMs to avoid the fuel pressure loss, which worked. But in that same map, since it takes 10 minutes to flash a map, normally when we work on stuff like this, it's a lot better to do one thing at a time. I did the naughty thing of two things at a time because we needed to save some time because we were running out of time for that day. And so I did make two changes. I lowered the boost down low, which helped, but I also introduced that a bit of more injection angle, hoping to help with the top end. And it got super pissed. And that's when we stopped. We said, okay, let's not your car tonight. This is not worth it. We put it back to normal. We lowered the boost back to lower ethanol. Everything's been fine. Thankfully, the FA24 is a pretty darn strong engine because that kind of thing, when we were testing in the early days on the FA20, that kind of thing was getting people in trouble for sure.
Really?
But the FA24 thankfully does seem to be able to survive some of these, testing, iterations without dying. So that's cool. That says a lot about the engine. Now we've already seen a couple engines now. I can think of three that I know of now where people are having problems with breaking pistons or melting pistons. And so that is a very real thing that can still happen to any piston, even a forged piston. So, and that kind of comes with the whole, again, not respecting the limits or trying to run too lean to get around the limits. But we can get to that here in another bit of a conversation. But basically, that's what went wrong that night with your car was first, too much boost, too high of ethanol, especially at lower RPMs where things are more sensitive. The fuel pump's not providing as high a volume of fuel yet because the engine is driving it and not spinning as fast yet. Very common thing with direct injection. And then the second part of it was this bug with the injection angle that Cobb has said, yes, this really does exist. We're going to investigate it. So again, we're not playing with that anymore. We're going to wait until we have more information.
Yep, and we're going to wait till we fix this stupid J-pipe.
Yeah,
Still working on that.
We have other stuff. Yeah, I think if we open up that J-pipe flange on your car, I think we're going to see it perform a lot better. But
oh yeah, and I tell you, I look at it every day.
You told me tonight that you don't have any check engine lights, so that's cool. We can touch on that if you want to.
Yeah, actually, we can move that up. Yes, let's talk about that because multiple people who have had the ETS J-pipe and the PNL, they ask me all the time, do you have a check engine light? And I'm like, no, why would I get it? But apparently people are still getting check engine lights. So tell us more about why that is.
So what we're seeing is that, primarily, I think from my understanding, both ETS and PNL, you mentioned PNL, and I think there's at least a couple other people that are making similar J-pipes.
STM is making one, I know.
Yeah. I think they're all using the Jezi 300 cell cat. I don't know if they're using exactly the same spec and model, but I think they've gone with 300 cell cats with the thinking that was going to be enough, because on that same 300 cell cat on both a EJ engine and the FA20 engine does seem to satisfy the emissions checking on the car and not have any codes. But it seems that the FA24 is a bit more sensitive. And so what we're finding with the ETS J-pipe is if you're short drives around town, no codes. But most of my customers that report seeing the P0420 code, that's the only code they see, it'll be on a longer drive. It'll be after they've been driving for at least 40 minutes or more, maybe 60 miles on the interstate. That's when it's more likely for the code to come on. There's a couple people that for whatever reason, I can't explain it, don't get it. And they're on identical tunes. It's not like they're tuned differently. They're using the same underlying settings, but some people aren't seeing it. But I would say majority of people with the ETS J-pipe or the PNL J-pipe, I've got some cars like that, or there's a couple other brands. Most people are getting P0420 every once in a while and having to clear it and just kind of move on. But I was surprised tonight when you told me before we started talking on camera here that you haven't seen a code yet with your custom J-pipe you had made.
Once.
And first thing I said was, well, what cat did you guys put in it? And the answer is a 400 cell cat. I think that's the key. I think that the cat is pretty large. The factory cat on the FA24 looks to me like it's larger than previous years. And it probably is more equivalent to that 400 cell cat. And the system is calibrated to look for that kind of, effectiveness. And that effectiveness might, basically it might be one of those things where you've been driving for long enough, it gets hot enough that the 300 cell doesn't quite satisfy the, the test, the internal testing of the ECU, but your 400 cell seems to be doing it because you've had that on there for a while now.
Yep.
And you drive your car a lot and a lot of miles.
Oh yeah. Yeah, even when I'm not racing, I'd say I put probably 120 miles a day on the car.
Yeah.
And
so that's interesting. I guess I wonder if we're going to see the other manufacturers switch to a 400 cell cat. It's going to add a little bit more cost to the pipe, I imagine. But if it avoids the check engine light, then that's going to keep a lot of guys happier. So that might be what we end up seeing people move to.
Yeah, the cats are not cheap.
No, that's why
cheap.
Why are J-pipes so expensive now? Ripping everybody off. I'm like, look at the cost of materials, and also look at paying fabricators in America to build something that's really nice. Do you want a cheap piece of crap that falls apart? And do you want check engine lights coming on? No. So it's expensive to manufacture this stuff. I know with our, the other business that I co-own, Paragon, we're manufacturing stuff for the C8 Corvettes, and materials are expensive. Shipping is expensive. Everything's expensive. It's like, and it like, we're the little guys in the grand scheme of it, and so is ETS. ETS is a little guy in the grand scheme of things. They're just trying to, do their thing, and their materials are expensive.
So basically, the play here is find a local shop, become really good friends with the owner, buy a used VA J-pipe and put your own cat in there.
Yeah, I mean, so the homemade thing, maybe he'll make some more of those. Maybe he'll produce some of those, if they work. Yeah, there's a market for it. If he'd have, but that's the thing is like, he's a he's a service shop, he's a repair shop, he
Oh
does
yeah.
mods. He doesn't have a team of fabricators to crank these things out. So if they're good and they work and everybody wants them, he'd have to figure out how to scale that up and get some fabricators in there. ETS, like I haven't seen ETS anything come in stock in any kind of quantity. Anytime we're doing ETS packages for people, I'm having to put it, basically throw it in the queue with ETS and tell people, hey, 2 to 5 days. So they're basically just barely filling orders as fast as they can come in. And that's, again, it's just, there's high demand and there's still not a lot of people to employ to do these jobs.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem too. So
I'm glad that you brought that up because like next time I go to get the flange put on mine, I'm gonna watch real closely so I can learn, and then I'll just do it myself. I think we're gonna have Heavy Metal Rex branded jpipes very soon.
yes, you just start making jpipes in your garage. Welding's really easy.
Oh yeah, I mean it can't be that. Hey, I used to solder. It can't be that hard.
Yes, it's just soldering for big pipes, for big things.
Pipe soldering. So I'm glad that you brought that up because that is definitely something, especially when people find out, when they ask me what my mod list are, they want to know, and I'm like, oh okay, well we made this one at the shop, and they're like, well surely you're getting codes. I'm like, no, I didn't even know that you guys were getting codes.
And in hindsight now, I think Misha and I talked about this, and we kind of, he's like, what size cat do you think I should use? And I think we went around and around. I forget if what I suggested or how we landed on that one, but I know we've talked about this before, so maybe that's why he was like, well, I'm going to go a little bit bigger and make sure it works, and it did. That's cool. So.
Yeah, and just another recommendation for Ecotech. I mean, and just like the combination of you and them and the people that they have there. I mean, it's just so much knowledge. Like if I could get Misha to stand for 5 minutes, I learn weeks worth of stuff from him. And then same thing with you. So like this stuff is always very interesting to me.
He's been around a long time. He's seen some stuff for sure.
Yeah, especially with Subarus, and it's we're all in great hands. This is that's why I'm not too worried when something happens at the shop or something happens with the car, because I know that regardless of what happens, the team that I have, which is you and Adam and Misha and everybody else there, you're gonna figure it out. I don't have to worry about it. So like when I leave some of these dyno days, I'm like, okay, we'll try again next time. No big deal. Never worried. And you know what? If it blows, then we have a great place for it to already be to rebuild it to be better. So I'm never really worried, because that's another thing people ask me. They're like, aren't you worried it's going to blow? I'm like, yes, I'm very worried. But if it does, there's worse places it could happen than Ecotech.
That's true. So they'll fix it up.
All right. So did you want to talk about boost and what that means? So like people are starting to see like higher numbers as stuff goes on, and people even like to talk about boost numbers when it's just like bolt-ons. So do you want to address some of that?
Yeah, I mean, we can. A very common question that I get is, how much boost are we going to run? Or if somebody is tuned with us, they'll say, well, hey, I saw tuner XYZ is running this much boost on their customers' cars. Can I do that? Is that safe? And we get that question a lot, where people, there's more people sharing their results. There's more tuners out there. People are doing different things. So we do get that question a lot. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So the biggest thing with a turbo engine, the number one thing you're using to make your power is the boost. How you choose to set the fueling has an effect on the power. Of course, ignition timing is it's not really, it's improper to use ignition timing to make power. You need to use an ignition timing curve that makes sense for the engine, the fuel type, all things considered, the use of the car, how hot the engine's going to get after some yanks. But, that has to be set appropriate. But boost is your main thing. And so, most tuners understand that, and they're just they're playing with the boost pressure to get the power that the customer wants or that they want to show off. And so, I tell people, I've done a lot of testing on the dyno with, my own FA24 cars that I have at my disposal. And, with customer cars like yours too, we've tried, I've tried all the different boost levels at different fuel types to kind of understand, like, where do I think it's worth it? Where is it not? Can you gain an extra 10, maybe 15 horsepower, but are you putting the engine under a lot more stress? And that's one thing that I remind people is that, like, look, this is a pretty small turbocharger and a pretty big engine. And when you push a lot of boost pressure on a small turbo with a big engine, you create a lot of back pressure. Back pressure is basically how hard the engine's having to push through the turbine to spin the turbo up to that RPM that makes that boost pressure you're after. And, it's also called your pumping losses. And if you're really, if you're pushing a lot of back pressure, the engine's, again, kind of having to work really hard for the power it's making. It creates kind of a vicious cycle of, damage on the engine potentially, and also maybe damage on the turbocharger. So I try to spend a lot of time understanding where I feel like those limits are. And I tell guys, look, this is where I think it is, and for me personally, I really don't see a lot of benefit in pushing the stock turbo much past 20 pounds. I've seen, yes, in some cases it can make a little extra power. And sometimes if, tuners are really pushing it with a lot of ignition timing, lean fueling, yeah, they can get some pretty impressive numbers on the dyno, but I just don't feel like that's safe in the long term, especially for a stock engine. So again, that's, that kind of comes down to like your tuner and how conservative they tend to be. Or, some tuners will, let their customers say, yeah, give me all of it. Give me all of it. And they'll give them all of it, and it may not last very long. And then some customers are like, well, I asked for all of it. This is what I got. So it happens. Some guys are kind of upset that the tuner didn't kind of step in and, maybe mom them a little bit and say, okay, Johnny, yeah, okay, I'll give you a little bit more than Timmy, but I'm not going to give you enough to, crash your bike, So that's kind of the thing there. And to me, we've talked about this a lot about reliability, my tuning approach. And to me, it's way more important that these engines are very reliable for people. And, people aren't getting in more than what they ask me for an aggressive tune. I'm not going to give them something that I know is very likely to hurt the engine if they're too hard on it. I still don't want it, it just doesn't make sense to do that for people, because I see too many people that get that from other tuners and they're really disappointed when it does break. And the tuner, the other tuner might just say, well, this is what they asked for.
Yeah, which is it's true, but I think the word conservative isn't synonymous with not trying your best. I think that sometimes people see that and they think, oh, well, this guy like tunes a little bit higher, this guy tunes a little bit lower. That tune's not that great. That's probably the better of the two tunes.
It is definitely one of the most difficult things as a tuner to figure out, is to like where's that balance of giving somebody a good amount of power that's also reliable, and and not making them feel like you're shortchanging them compared to other tuners who are giving more power. Trying to find that balance, and also kind of take into account what a customer is really truly looking for. It's tricky. I've been doing this for 12 years and, like over 5,000 Subarus now. And it's still something, it's still a process. It's still something mentally I think about every time I'm tuning cars is, am I finding that balance for people? Am I riding that line of giving them some pretty good horsepower out of this car, but making sure that reliability is also at the forefront? And, and most of the customers that choose to work with us, that is the type of people that we try to attract and work with, is people that do want reliability to be just ahead of the power. They want the most power they can get, but they don't want to sacrifice reliability. And so when it comes around to talking about boost on these cars, again, to me, depending on the fuel type, certainly if we're talking about 91, or like lately I've been tuning a lot of California cars on 91, and those have been interesting to tune. I've figured out kind of what I can get away with on those to keep them knock free, and it's not easy. The FA20 is a really good engine, 93 in there, and certainly ethanol, but let's just say 93, they're super happy cars. You can get some really significant power on 93, like we've seen with your car.
Yeah.
Regular 91, not California 91, it also works pretty darn well. And then the 92 octane was like out in Washington area and a few other areas, they have 92. Again, it works great, but California 91 is notoriously, fussy, gross fuel. But honestly, I've kind of figured out how I can still get some pretty darn good power and smoothness for these guys, but while keeping it still reliable. But anyway, the boost thing, and it kind of, it depends. It depends on the mods, depends on the fuel type. With ethanol, that's the thing with ethanol. It's easy to just keep cranking up the boost and maybe seeing some extra power for it, but not really thinking about the consequences behind the scenes of what that's going to do on the engine. So I don't know. There's no easy answer. I can't just say this is the number of boost that works. But what I've been finding on most cars is that I like to take them up. I like to kind of ramp the boost in. I don't give them a crap load of boost down low. That's a little bit that's where the engine's at its most vulnerable point. I try to ramp the boost in, work my way up somewhere between 18 and 20, depending on the setup, the mods, how the logs look. and leave it there. Even though there is more on the table there that might gain a little bit more power, to me, I haven't found that to be worth this, what I think could be the sacrifice in reliability in the long term. And again, we haven't been tuning these cars that long.
Yeah.
People don't have that many miles on these cars. They're coming into me for tuning, and they've only got it that like two. You know, I had several of these cars in the dyno. I think I had 4 on the dyno last week, right? And 2 of them weren't even over 1,500 miles. These guys just got their cars, just broke them in, and they're asking me to tune them, and they're having the shop put parts on for them. So I have to think about that. I can't go in there, in my opinion, I don't want to go in there gung-ho and give them something that's not going to last them 50, 60, 70,000 miles if that's what they want. And most guys do. So we're early. We can't, you know, I know everyone's getting pretty excited about these cars. They're seeing all these big numbers on the internet. Tuners are seeing other tuners do big numbers, and they're like, they want their customers to be showing that off. But I don't know. I always think about reliability. I'm always one of the last ones to be putting up big, crazy numbers, especially not for customers, because again, I want people's cars to last. You know, I want the engine to be considered reliable, because we're, you know, collectively as a group of tuners and people modding these cars, because we're treating them with respect, and they're lasting because of that.
I'm glad you said that, because I was having this conversation again with Misha, because we were talking about exactly that. You know, you keep, especially now, we're going to get into this next, exactly the next thing we're going to talk about is there are tuners that go online, they post whatever they're finding, and that's really great. You know, it's group research, everybody shares what they're doing, and it is fun to see, you know, what is this tuner doing, what is that tuner doing, or like, you know, who's going to be first to come up with this power, and you see these big numbers, and I think that there's a certain level of expectation that needs to be set when somebody goes in with their car, because all cars are different. All fuel is different. All parts are different. Even though it's all the same, everything can react differently. You know, even now we have tons of people who not only is the Subaru this WX is their first car, it's their first sports type vehicle. It's the first car they've ever tried to tune. And if the only thing they see when they go on Facebook is, well, so-and-so made 400 with just an intake, well, they're going to say, okay, well, I'll just buy an intake, I'll go get this tune, and I should have exactly that number. And that's not always the case, you know. A question, I think you maybe answered this, or somebody answered this a little bit ago, was also like where you live matters. You know, the air, the sea level and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that go into this.
Elevation is part of it, right?
Yeah, you can't just be like, oh, well, just give me what he has. I mean, well, chances are that tuner probably could give you what he had, but it may not be the best for your car.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a car that was like 500 horsepower that can last 3 years versus 600 horsepower that lasts 3 days, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. And I, knock on wood, my car has been really good with the reliability aspect. The gas mileage isn't terrible. I try to keep my ear out as much as I can. Like, I don't hear anything funky in it, and it never performs unusually, you know. So anyway, so with that said, this leads right into our next question, which is, you know, I know people are seeing the big turbo kits coming out, or like turbo kits in general, and I've seen a couple of people on Facebook especially post, you know, which turbos they've used and which power they're making and all that. So this is a big question, because it's not just how these turbos are going to be affecting our cars, but how are they affecting the different hardware that is coming on our car? Because, you know, we have electronic wastegate. You know, is that something that's going to change? You know, people want to know, can we run external wastegates? Is that something that's going to change? So it's a big question. If you can try to tackle it somehow, maybe one piece at a time. How do you want to go about doing that?
Okay. Let's give it a shot. So we touched earlier, there's going to be a couple different things I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see some what I'll just call like stock location, like bolt-on turbos, where they mate right up to your existing downpipe or jpipe. They could even work theoretically with a stock jpipe. They'll bolt right onto the header. They'll be basically of the same design and shape and flanging of a stock turbo, just with maybe a larger compressor housing, maybe a machined out turbine housing, larger wheels in there, different, maybe like billet wheels and technology like that. We're going to see turbos of that nature that will be internally wastegated, that will be able to, you know, you will probably swap your electronic wastegate from your stock turbo onto that upgraded turbo, or maybe it'll come with one that's the same and you just plug it in. But we're going to see turbos like that, I would say, probably in the pretty near future, which is cool. And the reason why we're going to see them like that again is because these engines are different. They control the wastegate electronically by using an electronic actuator to open the wastegate arm, versus the FA24 and the EJ engines that use basically a pneumatic valve and basically take the boost pressure, run it through a boost controller, and push the arm open with pneumatics. So that, that style of boost control, there's a lot of turbos that are pretty easy on the market to do that. But with the electronic wastegate, everything has to be in the right orientation, has to fit, has to be correct. So we're going to see some turbos like that, and those are going to be very cool. And then ETS has their turbo kit out now, which I'm super excited to see. Because I was hoping, because I got the Garrett G series turbos on there, which I'm a huge fan of. So they've used Garrett G series turbos. Now, granted, this is a whole kit, so it's headers, it's a different jpipe, it's going to be a different inlet. It's a whole kit. They've got a whole like oil scavenge system on it. It's really nice. It's a pretty expensive kit. But I saw some sticker shock right away when people saw the price. They're like, what? I think it's like $7,800.
But
and
it's
people
everything.
are like, oh, that's so much for a turbo kit. But then, the smart people out there broke it down for him and said, look, the turbo's $3,000. This is not a cheap turbo. This is not an eBay turbo. This is a Garrett G series turbo that everything's made in-house in the US. They're using Jesse Cats in there. They're, high quality materials. They're honestly like that $7,800. A lot of that is materials and labor and paying somebody else. It's not like they're making $4,000 on that turbo kit like everybody thinks in their head. That is the right price for that turbo kit. And in fact, it's probably kind of low. They're probably just trying to get them out there so they can sell some. Because you start to bring the price up too much, and you will price yourself out of a lot of people's budget. But anyway, getting beyond the point there. Either way, super nice looking turbo kit, and hopefully I will get to play with one here soon. I got a couple people that are considering grabbing it, so we'll see. But anyway, I was excited. My first question when I saw they were working on it was, what are you going to do about the wastegate? Is that still going to work? How's that going to work? And they did adapt the factory wastegate to work with the Garrett G series turbos, and Garrett G series turbos have a turbine housing with a nice internal gate. So a lot of aftermarket kind of like, just generic turbos that you could put on any car with a kit, a lot of them don't have that internal wastegate. A lot of them expect you to use external.
Oh, I see.
Like a lot of other like, I don't like, let's just say precision turbos. And I could be wrong, but I don't know offhand of any precision turbos that have internal wastegate housing options. They're pretty much all designed for an external wastegate to be your wastegate control. And same goes for a lot of other kind of larger, again, rotated style or just kind of traditional turbos. But Garrett's G series turbos do have an internal wastegate housing option, which is really nice. And so they've adapted that to work with the Subaru. And I talked to Nathan from TPG Tuning. I saw him, he was tuning one, and he and I chat a little bit here and there. I was like, hey, how's the wastegate control? Is it good? Is it working pretty well? He goes, yeah, there's a couple little things to figure out with it as far as the tuning goes, but pretty obvious stuff. He goes, but other than that, it works perfect. And I'm like, that's exciting. It's really exciting to me to be able to put a G series turbo straight away on the FA24 engine and tune it with the stock ECU using natural electronic control. That's really neat. So that's kind of how that's working. Then to answer the question about external wastegate, can we do external wastegate? And the answer is not really. The ECU doesn't have any way to control. So external wastegate is all pneumatic control, like I talked about. It's just a larger pneumatic valve that is sitting down on the exhaust collector before the turbo. And again, it's still using a boost controller to route some boost to it to open it up and to basically bypass exhaust around the turbo. But again, that requires the pneumatics and also requires electronic control from an ECU. And the ECU in the FA24 can't do that. Now, here's what you could do is you could buy like an aftermarket like Greddy or standalone gauge boost controller. They make third-party units that will operate a 3-port boost control solenoid, and you could program your boost targets in that, and then you could have it operate the wastegate. The problem is you're probably going to piss off the stock ECU. It's going to be expecting to be controlling the wastegate electronically. So to answer your question, maybe there's a roundabout way to do external wastegate control on this engine, but I don't think it's going to be popular. I don't think we're really going to see it, and it's not going to work for somebody that drives their car on the street and wants it to all function like stock.
So basically the more we talk about this, the more we talk about EJs, because I never owned an EJ. So there's so many things that I'm learning. It's almost seems like the external wastegate was an answer to a deficiency. Does that make sense? So like it was, it would say what I'm saying. So it was better to have the external wastegate versus having just like the way that they were running it with the boost controller on the EJ.
Kind of. Okay, so let me try to explain that real quick. Okay. So the factory location turbos, basically the turbine housing of an EJ engine, especially on a stock turbo, is not great in the sense of the wastegate. The way the wastegate's designed is not great. It has a lot of back pressure, like we talked about earlier. It's very susceptible to boost creep, and if you put an external wastegate on an EJ stock turbo, there is some significant power gain, to be had. So that's why it kind of became popular to do that. And then especially if you're putting on some bigger stock location turbos, you're restricted to fitting them in the stock location, which means you're kind of compromising on that turbine housing. Turbine housing doesn't have a great shape to it, doesn't have a lot of room to be large enough to work well in that location. So external wastegate kind of helps alleviate some of those issues. So that's, again, another reason why it's popular when you put like a larger, like an FP Black on it. External wastegate can produce more power than an internal wastegate version of the same turbo. Or again, if you're doing a rotated turbo kit, it becomes very difficult a lot of times in the orientation and the location there to incorporate an internal wastegate. So at that point, people are just buying a Garrett turbo or a Precision turbo, or manufacturers of turbo kits just spec it out with a turbo that doesn't have a wastegate built into the exhaust housing, and they expect you to have an external wastegate to control the boost on that rotated turbo kit. So that's kind of where external wastegates kind of gain their popularity with the EJ. And then of course the FA guys, it became a thing on there again, just for performance, for power, for larger turbos, and they actually have to run 2 wastegates because it's a twin scroll header. And what's really terrible, what I hate about external wastegates on the FA20 is because of the way the cylinders are paired and where you have to put the wastegates, it basically puts a wastegate on each bank of the engine. On an EJ, when you do twin scroll, you pair the front cylinders and the back cylinders together, each into their own scroll. And if your external wastegate on one of those, you'd have a wastegate on each one of those scrolls. Again, front cylinders, back cylinders. The way a super engine fires is 1 3 2 4. So it fires the 2 cylinders on each side, and then fires the other 2 cylinders on the other side. Okay, does that make sense? It doesn't go 1 2 3 4 like you might think it goes 1 3 2 4. That's why they kind of get that rumble noise. Is partially because they fire 2 cylinders together and an unequal manifold on the EJ. The way it meets, it makes this thump, 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 thump because of the timing of it all. The FA doesn't sound like that normally in stock form because it is firing, but it's like it's firing pairs and they're meeting in the middle and it's all just an even tone, right? But you put the external wastegates on there on the FA, and you hear that firing of 2 cylinders back to back together, and I don't like the way it sounds.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, they sound weird. Like I've seen some customer. This is in the past. Obviously, external wastegates aren't okay to do anymore. Those are bad. But let's just say in the past, when external wastegates were more popular, I remember some guys that like I would do the first pull on their car and they'd be like, "Oh my God, is my car okay? That doesn't sound right." I'm like, "That's just external wastegates. That's just the way they sound." And a lot of it has to do with that cylinder pairing where you have a gate on each bank of the engine and the way it fires, boom, 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 into the wastegate sounds weird to me. It's strange, but anyway, we're getting a little carried away with the conversation. Anyway, I don't think that external wastegate is going to really be a thing on the FA24, again, because electronic control is how it works. But the cool thing is ETS already has a Garrett G series turbo working with the stock computer that's super cool. I don't think, and again, for the most part, most people driving these cars around, you know, they're not going to need that kind of thing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be happy
Interesting.
with an internal wastegate and a good turbo.
Yeah, which, hey, from what we've seen, people are getting very happy. So
Yeah.
that's so. All that said, big turbos are coming. Fuel. So
Yep.
fuel is going to be the issue here, right? And so,
Oh yeah.
you know, before we get into like the fueling for that, I wanted you. Do you mind touching on the E85 stuff? Because I know there's been this kind of goes back to the whole Facebook post that we had. There's a lot of
Yep.
questions. You know, some people say they can, some people say they can't. Like, what is
Yep.
going on with all that? Can our cars
Okay.
run full E85?
So short answer, yes, they can run full E85. The fuel pump seems to work fine with it. The injectors are okay with it. You're not going to, so far, you know, we haven't seen any evidence of higher ethanol blends upsetting anything in terms of just having the system get upset and like fuel pressure do weird things at weird times. So yes, you can put full E85 in the cars, and obviously, you know, we're starting to see some tuners are promoting it and doing it. The problem is the fuel limits, like we've talked about.
Yeah.
And I've done my own testing with higher blends of ethanol, and you know, and I'm also seeing how other tuners are doing it with higher blends of ethanol. And it goes back to that bit of like reliability and making sure that we're tuning the engine safe. I don't want to, again, and that some of this comes down to tuner philosophy. Some of this comes down to, you know, what I might think is safe versus what somebody else has spent a lot of time and effort testing and feels like is safe, and difference of opinions. And I'm not going to name any names. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I see some engines being run at leaner AFRs and I'm comfortable with. And here's the thing about direct injection is that, and you can see this on OEM, Audis, Volkswagens, a lot of other direct injection vehicles. They'll run very lean AFRs for moments of time, meaning that like the first pull, you know, like the first bit of going into boost on like a Volkswagen turbo engine, for example, might be a pretty lean AFR that might surprise you. I won't talk numbers, but it'll be pretty lean from what, you know, you might consider to be a safe AFR when you get a tuned engine, even if it's tuned by Cobb, even if it's a Cobb OTS map, and you look at what kind of air fuel ratio they're targeting, and you look at what a Volkswagen stock runs at the beginning of a pull, you might be very surprised to say, whoa, how are they running it that lean? Direct injection can be run pretty lean, but only for kind of periods of time. And the OEM knows that. And if you watch the OEM strategy, you'll notice that as time persists or you spend more time in boost, they'll shift to a richer strategy to protect the cat, to protect the engine, to avoid detonation. But the whole ECU and the logic is built around that. The Subaru ECU doesn't really do that. I mean, it does to a small degree, but if you're taking control of the fueling with a tune and you're asking it to run those leaner AFRs that you sure might work for a pull on the dyno or two pulls on the dyno, but a person goes out and uses the tune at that kind of a lean AFR and they do second, third, fourth, and they put it in fifth and they keep going, they melt their piston, that's too lean. And you can't necessarily say, oh, they went into fifth gear, better richen it up. That logic doesn't really exist to work that way in the ECU. So in my opinion, to keep the car safer, you have to be at a richer AFR. You have to be at an AFR that's safe enough for fifth gear or for several runs or for running around the track at the road course, for example. So my philosophy on what is a safe AFR to leave a car at versus I know what you can get away with to make a big number on the dyno are two very different things. And I'm getting a little concerned seeing the AFRs that some people are sending out the door to people to get away with the full E85. And again, and maybe it's okay. Maybe it's going to be fine. Maybe we're going to see these guys put 70 or 80,000 miles on it at these AFRs that I personally think might be a little bit too lean. Maybe it's okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe maybe you really can get away with these leaner AFRs, but I've spent a lot of time with direct injection engines, not just in Subarus, but other vehicles, and studied and really thought about what kind of AFRs are appropriate and tested it on the road course and everything else. And I guess, my philosophy doesn't quite line up with some of what I'm seeing people do to run E85. And the reason, and you might ask, like, well, why are they running lean? Why don't they just simply go richer and then it's safe and they run E85? We run into that problem of that injection window we talked about. How much time do you have to spray the fuel? And if you can't move your injection angle, which we can't really do right now, or even if you can, but you're still trying to run 23, 24, 25 pounds of boost, that injection window has to get very big. Well, one way to shorten it is to spray less fuel, which means a leaner AFR. You might get inside that window. You might get inside that. You might be able to get that 23 pounds of boost you're looking for, but you're doing it with a leaner AFR to shorten the window. And again, it might work on the dyno for a pull. It might work for a drag pass, but it's not going to work when you click into fifth gear and the piston starts getting too hot and breaks.
Or even just like long periods of time. Just long periods of time.
Like road course, you know,
Okay.
like road course use. That's not going to work on the road course. You might get away with it for a drag pass, you know, and again, you can get away with it for a dyno pull. I've tried some very lean AFRs on these engines on the dyno, and it works. It makes some power, but it's not safe, in my opinion. Again, I try to be very clear that, like, I don't want to say other tuners are wrong or doing things the wrong way, and I want to admit that, you know, maybe you know, if I think this is safe, maybe really this is safe. You know, we don't really know for sure. There's no definitive, you know, like answer on this to say, yep, this is the magical number that can work for X number of miles and X number of pulls. We don't know. It's all just, you know, it's all testing. It's all takes time. And again, just a reminder, we're very early.
Yeah, very early.
People are already doing really crazy things with it, which is super cool. It's cool. I'm really excited to see how fast things are developing for this engine. But at the same time, I'm getting a little nervous when I see people breaking pistons in, you know, already, and, you know, running high amounts of ethanol and high boost and sending me logs that look really concerning. You know, I just, and again, and everyone's, you know, it's just kind of where we are now in the world of cars. It's like everybody wants to be first. Everybody wants to be fast. Everybody wants to get out there and get all the attention. And I don't know, it can be a little dangerous, I guess I would say, you know.
I'd say most of the people that watch my channel, I don't, at least the ones that I talk to, the impression that I get from most of them is, yes, it's somewhat the opposite of that. I see that you're doing this stuff. You're going really, really slow. I see what these guys are doing. They're going really, really fast. But, like, your car is still working. And I've seen a couple of cars that are now no longer working. I've seen more transmission issues than I've seen actually engine issues. I've had a couple of people talk about a little bit higher boost, a little bit higher torque. They've started seeing the heads start to come up. That's the most common thing that I hear, especially on Reddit. That's more than I see transmissions and heads starting coming up. I actually, personally, I have not experienced anybody, or nobody's come and told me yet, other than that one guy that was on YouTube, we're not even going to talk about him, about like an engine blowing up. So that's really interesting. I'm glad that that you're seeing some stuff, because reliability is something, because we're almost to June. So we're talking 6 months of tuning, and already they're throwing big turbos on. You know,
I know, it's crazy.
That's pretty crazy. So I'll ask you this question again, June 2024, and you might have a much better picture to tell us exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So E85, that's cool. So now you wanted to talk a bit about how are people even going to get more fuel into this car with the bigger turbos?
Yep. So that's going to be the next hurdle now. I don't know if you saw, again, I'll go back to TPG talking about their testing they did.
Yeah. They shot,
I don't know.
That's when they shot a little bit of fuel through the meth kit. Is that what that?
Well, no, they used a nitrous kit.
Okay.
So they had a nitrous kit on there, and a nitrous, what they call, so like,
yeah.
So just real quick, just for terminology, there's two types of nitrous, generally speaking. There's dry shot and wet shot. Dry shot means that, like, when you activate it, there's just a nozzle that sprays the nitrous. And then in that case, you're either running rich enough already, or you're compensating, like the ECU knows that the nitrous is spraying and it's spraying more fuel to make the air fuel mixture the same, but get the power from nitrous. And then there's the term wet shot. Wet shot means you've got two nozzles. One is spraying the extra fuel needed directly into the airstream, and one is spraying the nitrous. So he had a wet shot kit on there.
Okay.
He turned off the nitrous, but he still used the wet shot to basically spray fuel. And I mentioned earlier when we talked, I'm like, there's, sometimes we've seen kits where they call it like a fifth injector. They'll put like an extra fuel injector, like in the intake manifold, and at higher loads only, they'll spray some fuel into the air intake stream to provide the extra fuel. So we've seen that in the past. That was the thing that came around, kind of came and went pretty quick on the FA20 engine. And then methanol injection is another way to get some fuel in. So that's obviously spraying a mixture of, generally, like a methanol mixture in there, water and methanol mixed together. Methanol acts as a supplementary fuel source. So if you spray enough of that, you can reduce how much, again, injection window you need, because you're using methanol to get the same air fuel ratio you're looking for. So we might see that. Eventually we might see, like the FA24, kind of right before, the whole green speed thing, I was tuning quite a few of those IBR secondary injection kits. Did you ever see those?
No, that I have not seen.
Okay, so we'll touch on that for a moment. And I wouldn't be surprised if IBR is already probably thinking about this and trying to figure out how they can do something like utilize this kit they have. But this kit is very intelligent. It would plug in line with one of the fuel injectors, one of the direct injectors, and it would measure the pulse width of the injector, and it would also figure out the timing. They did some very clever math in there to basically work out. They could kind of reverse engineer, so to speak, the engine RPM and the pulse width, and determine when it was time to start activating some extra port injectors that their whole controller controlled. So now the problem became with green speed is that to do this, you would have to swap to the BRZ metal manifold, because that provides the holes for the port injectors. You get the rail kit, you'd set all that up. You'd also have to run a return line, because you had to then have, a rising rate fuel pressure regulator so that your fuel pressure raises with boost. But once you got all that kit on there and you plug that IBR SIC secondary injector controller in, you put some 1050X injectors in, you'd plug it all in. It just worked. As your fuel demand went up for your direct injection, it would spray the port to make up for it. And I tuned some cars like that. It was awesome. I did a few FA20s that were like in the 600 or 700 horsepower range, and it worked awesome with that kit, because it's giving you all the extra fuel you need through port injectors, but still utilizing the direct injection. So we might at some point see something like that come out, but we're going to have to find a way to add on the port injectors without obviously deleting any emissions items.
Right.
That was the problem. That manifold gets rid of the TGVs. It takes the place of them. And so that's kind of why that stopped working. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're working on a way to bring that back that'll work with green speed, and find a different way to maintain the TGVs that are required with COB, in general with green speed and the EPA, of course. They're going to find a way to maintain the TGVs, but maybe do a different intake manifold that goes on top and has provisions for port injectors and rails and lines. And you could add all that in, and their kit could still work without disrupting green speeds, tuning or whatever. So that might come back for the FA20 in that capacity, I'm guessing, maybe. And then we might see something like that for the FA24 to give us, again, that port injection add-on, because that is the coolest thing. That is the coolest technology that we don't have for Subarus, is engines that have factory port injection and direct injection. Have you ever are you familiar with that?
I am not actually, no.
Okay, so I don't know how late it's getting for you, but
well, we can keep talking. Yeah.
Let's touch on it. It's really fun. So, and I know you want to ask me about GR Corolla, so we can touch on that too.
Yes.
So the BRZ FRS, both the FA20 variant that came out in 2012 and the FA24, those engines both come with direct injection and also port injection.
Yeah, that I knew. I did know that. Yeah.
Okay. So that is the best of both worlds. You get the direct injection spraying in the cylinder, keeping it cool, but then you've got port injectors to supply extra fuel, and those are easily upgradable to do all the fuel you want. So like my Audi RS3, it comes with direct injection and port injection. And I'm getting to a point now where I've exceeded my port injectors, and I'm adding on a downpipe, an intercooler, and all I have to do is drop in some new port injectors, and I've got the fuel for 1,000 horsepower if I wanted it.
Interesting.
It's that easy.
Okay.
But with a direct injection only engine, it's really hard. You have to either add that somehow and control that somehow, or you have to you know, try to find upgrades, but upgraded direct injectors are not easy to do. That's very expensive technology to try to, recreate. And so, the GR Corolla, again, that's the latest engine to come out that has both direct injection and port
Oh,
injection.
okay.
So that's a cool thing about that GR Corolla, is that we're going to be able to upgrade the port injectors and run high amounts of E85 immediately. In fact, it looks like, I've been doing some work on that, car now. It looks like there's actually quite a bit of capacity for ethanol in those right off the bat. Again, because they have direct injection, they run very high fuel pressure, and they've still got some port injectors there. I think we can utilize those to probably do full E85 comfortably on those cars. But we'll test that soon and get back to that. But that's a technology that, sadly we didn't get with the Subarus, neither the FA20 or the FA24 DIT engine, when it made it to Subaru, didn't lost the port injection.
Yeah.
If we had that, oh man, if we had that, full E85 right now would be super easy. No worries. You could run whatever safe AFR you want to, but have plenty of fuel. These guys put the ETS turbo kit on. They could just drop in some ID 1050X injectors and be making. They could be blowing the engine just simply because it's exceeding the mechanical capacity, not because they're having to run it too lean to get away with it. And then we could start putting IAG built FA24s in there that they're already working on.
Yeah,
put
I saw
an
that.
transmission in there. And these a built FA24 with factory port injection and an STI 6-speed could easily and very quickly be making 800 plus like it's nothing. The engine itself, the geometry, it seems like the mechanics of, or I don't know, mechanics not the right word, but the foundation, the FA24, the cylinder heads, the design, it's really good. If we dropped a strong one in there and we had all the fueling and the control, it would already, it's already amazing what we're seeing now, but I guess I'm just kind of dreaming now. It's getting late and I'm getting kind of tired. I'm starting to dream.
Because what you're talking about is something that I was just talking about today, because I'm really excited because I saw Bader just got one. So, and I know that there's a couple of other companies that are also building closed deck blocks. I think like Outfront is another company that's doing it. And
I haven't seen any. The only company that I've seen building engine blocks is IAG. So
okay,
I could have missed it, but I know IAG, and I have a good friend over there too, so I get a little, but they shared this publicly, but they are full steam ahead on FA24, closed deck blocks, and I'm sure others might be as well. I don't know for sure. I know IAG is.
But the fact that those are coming out, because you see like what the reputation is for FAs versus EJs on build. If you want big power, you go EJ. You want like good power, you can still make it. But I also agree that a built FA24 is just going to be just ridiculous. And to be honest, I kind of want one.
It's going to be awesome. But the challenge is going to be the fueling. And we'll see how the aftermarket can answer that. Can IBR come up with something slick like the SIC for the FA24? That'll work awesome if they can. Or are we going to see people start putting on methanol injection? Are we going to see like the fifth injector come back, which is kind of, I hope not, because I don't, there's some things there they're kind of weird about.
Thinking about a fifth injector.
If it stops spraying, the engine's going to go boom. That's the problem. The problem with secondary fueling that's not controlled by the ECU is if the ECU doesn't know when it stops or starts, it can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
Unless there's some good fail safes that can cut things off. So like, if you do a methanol injection kit and you're relying on the methanol quite a bit, generally it's good to use a fail safe output that does something. Maybe it cuts the RPM, or it turns on a bright red light so like the methanol stops spraying, like get off the throttle. If you don't have those kind of safeguards in place and you have supplemental fueling that's required to maintain this higher power, and it stops even for a moment, can be disastrous. That's one of the challenges, is that the natural ECU controlled fueling that we have with the FA24 is pretty limited. So how are we going to get around that? I don't know yet. I know what we've done in the past, and then, we'll see what people come up with for this.
I think this is a very exciting car, and I think that's the reason why we've seen so many parts come out so quickly. Because like in the beginning, the car's been out a year, right? For a year up until like March, and nobody really was worried about it, and then like it seems like all of a sudden, probably a little bit after COP released their stuff, that everybody just jumped on there with like, oh, we got to get these parts out, we got to get these parts out. I have no doubt that once this IG comes out with their blocks, there's going to be people that are going to want to build for that. And like you said, I'm sure these things are going to come out really fast. So I do have a question, because you mentioned the old FRS and BRZ, but what about the NA FA24? Is that also completely direct injection now?
No, it has port injection too.
What the hell?
I know. I know.
This doesn't make any sense.
I think okay, so here's what it is. You know, Toyota and Subaru got together on the FRS BRZ.
Yeah.
I theorize, I don't know for a fact, but the theory is that they made a deal and said, okay, we will help you develop this FA engine. Subaru said that. And Toyota said, okay, cool. We'll give you our direct injection technology, because Subaru never had direct injection until they worked with Toyota. So I think Toyota wanted a flat engine. Let's just, again, I could be wrong. Let's just pretend, and this could be true. But let's just say Toyota, they wanted a flat engine. Subaru's like, cool, we got that. And Subaru said, hey, we want direct injection. And they're like, hey, you know what? We got that. So they got together, they put it together, but they developed the dual injection. But Toyota said, hey, you guys can have the direct injection, but you can't have the dual injection. We're going to hang on to that. You know, it's off the table. It feels like something like that, to where Toyota kind of kept that dual injection technology and ability to themselves, and they've been using it on their cars, even again on the GR Corolla. You know, I really, you know, I was interested when that engine was announced, is it going to have dual injection? And sure enough, it did. But again, Subaru, even on the new FA24, didn't get to have that. And I'm guessing, again, just a theory, that Toyota said, no, you can't have both, but you can at least have the direct injection. And that's what Subaru really wanted.
God, that's so weird. That like how there's so, because like I've also tried to do like so many different like conspiracy theories about like what happened to the STI. And for me, it goes back to Toyota. Like I said this in another video, like what if Toyota also in their deal was like, hey, you know, we helped you do all this stuff. And I know you're like just, because like nobody owns Subaru, so Subaru has to do everything on their own. So they were like, hey, we'll help you build all these really cool cars, but like we're coming out with a Corolla that's going to have 300 horsepower that's basically an STI. Don't make an STI or something. Like it just, all of it happened at like the same time. I mean, like they got announced within, I want to say like weeks of each other. Like Subaru was like, oh, hey, we're not going to make an STI. And then like 2 weeks later, Corolla's like, we made one. It seemed really weird, you know, and like it's now weird. What you're saying that, it kind of makes me
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and maybe, and that's the other thing too, just the general trend is like Subaru has been getting steadily more boring. FA24 WX is awesome, but on the average, Subaru's been kind of getting a little bit boring and putting more effort into, you know, talking about EV and talking and you know, focusing on the other aspects of like the non-performance Subarus. Meanwhile, Toyota's been like the Supra with BMW is a sweet car, makes a lot of power. Then the GR Corolla, they're like, here you guys go. Here's the hot hatch you guys have always wanted, and for decades. And here it is at the end at the beginning. I'll just say the beginning of the end of the internal combustion era. I think we still have a long ways to go. I hope. Yeah. But as things are starting as internal combustion is starting to kind of wind down and hybrid and EV is becoming a big focus, they give us a GR Corolla now. It's like, what in the heck? What is going on? You know, why is Toyota coming to the table with all these really cool things? You know, like, I don't know. Have you seen, a little off topic, but have you seen the new Sequoia?
No, I haven't.
TRD Pro?
No.
Look at that thing. That thing is cool looking.
It's just weird because like for so long, like what you're saying, Toyota was kind of like, hey, we're going to make like every car, we're going to turn it into a crossover. Here's 14 more crossovers. Here's like Sienna, 10 more hybrids.
Toyota was not an exciting brand.
Well, 10 years ago. It stopped. Yeah, you're 100%. Yeah.
I don't feel like what?
Maybe 15, like since I guess the last exciting car that they made was like the Celica GTS.
Yeah.
Right? From like mid 2000s. And even that wasn't what one would call exciting.
Yeah. Toyota got boring for a while and now it's been getting more exciting in a way. And then Subaru's been kind of like, they dropped the STI, which sucks, you know? So I don't know. Anyway, Right. Let's get back on topic. It's getting
It is, yeah. So
a little late. What else do we got to touch on, and then we'll.
that's actually pretty much everything I've got.
Did we get it all?
We got all that and then some. I
Yeah.
definitely am looking forward to seeing what you do with that Corolla and like more because I've always been to be honest, if like this WRX didn't come out, I'd probably be out there hunting for a Corolla because I think it's such a cool little car. Plus, how many hot hatches do we have? You know.
I finally got to drive one around while I was, in Chicago last week, and it's a fun little car. I tell people like it's not fast. It like the power band is literally like the opposite of the VBWX. That the WRX stuffs you in the seat immediately. Like the onset of torque is just immediate, whereas the GR Corolla, like it's a wind out car, right? So like you kind of roll into it and there's not a whole lot there, but it just keeps yanking up top, and then it's quick. It's quick through the gears. But then you feel like when you turn the car into corners and stuff, it's a light, nimble little car. So it's like a little go-kart, but the VB certainly has a lot more punch. It's faster, but the Corolla is quicker.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah.
you put them on the road course, it'd be a good battle where, like the Corolla would run away through the corner, but then the VBWX would catch it, with the horsepower, unless you get more power in the Corolla, and that thing's going to run away. So they're such different cars, and just kind of depends what you're looking for. But the Corolla to me felt like a lot of fun to drive, just because it's like this little go-kart. I have a turbo 3-cylinder side by side. So to me, it almost reminds me of that in car form. That's just really fun to like toss around and throw through the corners and things like that. So I want to drive it on track. Hopefully next weekend I'll get to take it on track and see how it feels. And hopefully we get some tuning done with some ethanol in there, get some more horsepower and see what it can do. But yeah, I think the Corolla is really neat. But again, it's also very different,
Yeah. It's the STI. Just say it. You can say it. We're all here. We all know what it is. It's basically the Toyota STI.
I wouldn't call it that. I don't think it's that. It really truly isn't. It's its own thing. It's unlike anything else. Some people have said, "Oh, it's like a Golf R." It's not though. I don't know how to describe it. It's something different. It definitely feels. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like a GR86, but of course not rear wheel drive. It's kind of a front biased car, but it can put a lot of power to the rear. I don't know. It's a hot hatch.
Yep.
It's a hot hatch, and we've never really had a hot hatch. A Golf R is a hatchback.
Yeah.
And it's a great car. I had a Golf R. I had a 17 Golf R. I loved it. But the Corolla is very different from that. It's just this light, nimble little thing that was designed with taking it to the track and enjoying it with some boost and some all-wheel drive. It's fun. It's a fun car.
Yeah, I'll have to get one. I got a Type R coming soon-ish, maybe next month, to race on the channel. I've been looking for a GR Corolla just because everybody wants to see it. But hopefully, when I do find one, the guy lets me drive it first because I'm also really excited for it. Anyway, I'm glad that we finally got a chance to get down and do some of this stuff. There's so many things that happened with the WRX in the last month. Very exciting things. There's a whole lot more coming. I appreciate everybody who's been asking for Tuner Talk, which means that it's very popular. It's probably, I actually did do a poll recently, and this was the most popular series on the channel. Everybody loves it, and I wasn't too sure about it at first because it's long. You have to commit to watching it, but I also put in like the chapters to make it a little bit easier for you guys. So if you're looking for specific information, you can go.
It's kind of a podcast. I've talked to some people that listen in and like it, that come and work with us, and they kind of do like a podcast. They won't necessarily watch you and I talk, but they'll put it on and they'll listen.
Yeah.
It's like you could like if you're on a long drive, you could just play it over your stereo and put the phone down and just listen to us talk, because this is almost, we're doing this more like a podcast. There's nothing exciting here going on. We're not doing anything. We're just talking. But so it's almost just like a podcast, but you're recording the video, which I think is fun for people. But anyway, yeah, people love it. I get a lot of good feedback about it too. And in addition to just everything on your channel, you got a lot of fans out there.
I try to make it as educational because, like I said before, it's not just education for everybody else that's watching. Every single time I do these, or I talk to you, or I talk to Misha, I learn so much, and that information is invaluable for people who are buying these cars and may not even have a resource to go, because you You can Google any of these things, but it is
Yep.
going to be a hard, it's difficult to parse through all of the noise. So thank you
Yep.
for everybody for watching and supporting this channel and supporting this. You know, we definitely going to be doing more, especially with more things coming out. Graham, thank you again for coming back to the channel. We really appreciate it. And I hope you guys
Very
enjoy the
welcome.
video, and we'll see you in the next one.